I remember when I first started making videos with the camcorder, and the only thing that I knew how to do was press record and tell a story. There was a certain mystique surrounding that entire experience, like freedom to be let loose and just be creative. Here we are now, and sometimes I find myself focusing on the specs and the technical side of things a little bit too much. And that takes away from having that creative liberation that I once had. But since I've had the a6700, it's given me that spark again to go have fun, to delve back into what got me started in the first place, and to focus on the narrative work and just being creative. So that's my story, and here's who I think it's for. I think that the a6700 is for a very vast group of people in all different fields. From my experience, I can fully recommend it for most people in most cases, and I'll explain who. I also think there's a small group of people with different needs who this camera might not be for. The more I use this camera, the more I realize how confident I am in saying this is your camera to really almost anybody. I think it's for someone who wants to be a content creator, maybe a beginner, intermediate, or even someone who does client work, or someone who has no idea where to start or what camera to choose. This is not a review video. I've already done one of those, and I left a lot of video samples in that video, and I'll leave that one in the description if you're interested in the review. This is more of a recommendation video geared towards a lot of people whom I am going to address as I go along. I'm personally not a fan of camera reviews without someone giving solid video evidence and user experience. I've used this camera in a variety of different applications in both professional settings and for fun making some YouTube videos. I shot a wedding with the a6700, I vlogged with it, traveled with it, used it as my A cam, my B cam, as a product camera. I've gone in low light with it, shot in S-Log3, S-Cinetone, and straight out of camera. I've gone handheld with it, thrown it up on a gimbal, put a cine lens on it, used the kit lens in close quarters, and just as an all-around camera. I started wondering to myself as I've been using it through those different applications, who's this camera not for? But first, let's talk about who this camera is for, and that's what we're covering today on the Film Alliance. If you are a beginner, this is your camera, mainly due to the fact that it's easy to pick up and start shooting with right out of the box. It's got a lot of customization options with plenty of buttons and dials on the outside of the camera. The menu system is very easy and straightforward. It's got a touchscreen for those of you who don't like to use those dials and buttons. The program auto works great. It doesn't overexpose easily. I know that seems kind of funny to say, but I've shot with a lot of cameras, and usually program auto messes with the colors. For some reason, with the a6700, it doesn't. It looks great. Before we go on any further, if you like videos like this one where I give you tips and tricks on how to make better videos and what camera might be right for you, then make sure to subscribe and join the Film Alliance. There's room to grow with the a6700 with interchangeable lenses, so if you get this as a beginner, you'll be able to go into intermediate or even pro shooting. The lenses that you can buy for it are cheaper, being APS-C lenses, and I would have loved to start with this camera. If you're a wedding videographer just starting out, potentially this is your first camera. It does great in low light. In the wedding that I shot, I took it up to ISO 800 and all of my shadows looked great. Before I shot that wedding, I was super skeptical about those low light shots and how it would come out. But when I got home and I put it on the big screen, I was shocked to see how clean the images were. And in fact, this was my setup. The Viltrox 13mm lens with the a6700 and on a gimbal. And once I put that video together and I edited it with a very small amount of color grading, I was like, you know what? Anybody could go out and shoot a wedding with this camera. And so, you know, when I shot that wedding, I kept it in 4K 60. I kept my shutter speed to 1/125. I kept the ISO at 800 in those low light situations. And then all I did was adjust the aperture. And I was aiming for underexposing by about a stop to maybe say -0.7. And that was all I needed to do, and my shots looked great. Coincidentally, I did have my full frame A7S III with the Tamron 28-75 f2.8 for those close-up shots, which I did use, but I used the a6700 for 90% of the shots and was blown away by that image. Now I can sit here and confidently say, if you're a wedding videographer, this is your camera, or at least as your B cam. If you're into some filmmaking, not much, but some, this is your camera. If you throw a cine lens on this thing, you're gonna get some really good looking footage. It has a micro HDMI on the side of it for external recording and monitoring. It does only have one card slot, but the external recording fixes that problem, but you do have to buy a monitor. It can shoot an S-Log3, so you'll easily be able to color match to other cameras that you're using during your filmmaking shoot. You can import LUTs, so you can easily see what your image looks like while you're shooting, instead of just guessing by the exposure. And it's got time code, so all of your footage will match up in post. If you're a real estate shooter, this is your camera. You can throw a wide lens on it and just underexpose a tad so you don't blow out the windows. You can put it onto a small gimbal and have a super small and compact setup and be in and out without having to bring in a huge amount of gear. You can bring this camera in one hand and a tripod and a slider in the other, and be in the kitchen getting a nice slider shot of the house and be out in your car before the real estate agent even gets there. It's got Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, which makes it super convenient because you can transfer the files right there on the spot, maybe as a reference before you go home and edit your photos for that real estate agent. If you run a social media account for yourself or a company, this is your camera. The footage is easy to offload, whether it's through the USB-C or actually through the SD card. I guess that's easy on whatever camera you use. But the transfer speeds out of the USB-C are very fast, and that makes it super convenient, especially if you're out on set and you need to offload your data pretty quickly. This camera does not need a huge tripod, and that brings us to today's sponsor. This is probably my 5th travel tripod I've gone through. These things are small, they're compact, they're lightweight, and that makes them super easy to travel with. You can really go anywhere. The consistent issue that I've always had with these type of tripods is these legs become very flimsy and they flop open. This is a particular problem because if you have an expensive camera on your tripod and you go to put your tripod down and one of the legs is too flimsy and falls inward, then your tripod is gonna go over. It's happened to me, but not with this tripod. It's got a very sturdy hex key that you can tighten up if it ever becomes loose, and I've been using it steadily for about a month and I have not had any issues with it. It breaks down into a super small 17-inch form that you can put on your camera bag and travel through an airport with, but it also extends out to 62 inches for those standing talking head shots. You can pull it out like that and switch it into an overhead type of tripod, and you can even flip it upside down if you want to get those inverted shots for low angle situations. The legs are adjustable for that unlevel terrain, and it's got an adjustable ball head on top, which is nice and stiff, which I really appreciate. This is a very affordable tripod, and they allowed me to give you all a 25% discount until November 12th, 2023. So pick one up while you still can. You will thank me later. Now back to our video. Where were we? Oh yes, how this camera is almost perfect for everyone I can think of. If you're a hybrid shooter, a photographer, or do macro videography or photography, it has an EVF, which makes it super nice because then you can actually put your eye up to it without having any other outside light interfere with your display. It's got a 26 megapixel sensor, which is pretty good for the size camera. And from all of the photos that I've shot with this camera, I've been very impressed with the image quality. It has an AI chip for eye autofocus, and it can focus on other things like cars, trains, and animals. And it also has face memory, which kind of goes back to the wedding videographer. You can actually set the bride's face as the face memory, and then it will continue to focus on her and not focus pump between other people that are in the crowd. It happened to me. It's just a great camera for whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, at whatever learning point you are, content creating wise. With that being said, let's talk about overheating. Overheating has only been a real problem for me when I'm shooting with all of those settings completely maxed out and I just leave it recording steadily for over 20 minutes. But I never would do that anyways. I only do that for you guys because you asked me to test it out in those situations. Normally, I just shoot in 4K 60 and 420 10-bit, and I'll record bursts of maybe 15 to 20 seconds. I'll use it as my main B-roll cam and I don't have any issues. If I use it in 4K 24 and a talking head shot, it can record for over an hour without any overheating at all, which I've done in the past. If you want to crank those settings up and get the best image quality out of this camera, then you can get the Ulanzi Fan and you don't have to worry about overheating. Here are my results after using the Ulanzi Fan. But like I said, even if you decide not to get this fan and you only want the small form factor of the a6700, switch it over to 420 10-bit and you won't have any overheating issues, at least from my experience. Now let's talk about log. I love shooting in S-Log3 with the a6700. I used to get nervous about shooting with it because it's not that easy to use. If you want me to make a video on how I expose S-Log3 in the a6700 and then how I color grade it, let me know in the comment section. But if you don't know what log footage is, it's a color profile in the picture profile menu of the Sony camera that allows you to shoot a flat looking image, which gives you more ability to color grade in post-production, especially things like the shadows and the midtones. You can get a more stylized look of what you're going for. You can easily color match other cameras that you're using, and it increases the dynamic range by quite a bit. It looks better than just shooting straight out of camera with those colors that are baked in. With that being said, the baked in colors out of the 6700 to me look fine, definitely passable, but the S-Log3 footage looks a lot better. Now it's easy to mess up S-Log3 footage by over or underexposing, so it does take a little bit of practice to use and get used to, but for the most part, once you get past that learning curve, it's really nice to use. Alright, so here's my conclusion. I am a tad bitter that I didn't have this camera when I first started out, but I'm happy for those of you who are looking to jump into this space to get a camera like this one. This camera is not for someone who would want to live stream for an extended amount of time. I believe that it would overheat unless you attached an Ulanzi fan to it to continue the cooling process, and you can connect this fan to the camera and charge this at the same time and keep a power cord running to this at the same time. But I don't know if it would overheat. I think it would. If you use the a6700 for any type of live streaming, please let me know about your overheating results, because I'd be very interested to know, and I think other people would be too. I think that if you wanted to do long form live stream, then go with something like the FX30, which has an internal fan, and it might be better off for you. I also don't think the a6700 would be great for people who want to do slow motion. It can shoot in 4K 120 and 1080 up to 240, but to me that's just not slow enough. If you're looking for a budget-friendly 960 frames per second super slow motion, then go with the ZV-1 and a good lighting system. You will get some pretty insane shots. I made a video about that, and I'll leave that video in the description to see what you could get with the ZV-1. So there you go. That's my opinion and recommendation. That may change over time, but for now, that's where I stand. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. Thanks for watching, and until the next one, have a nice week.